Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, in addition to the small teasers that we've been getting, where there have been new uniques and things like that, we did get one major piece of news that I want to go through in quite a bit of detail. So this is the new Divination cards that are being added in patch 3.19 for the Lake of Kalandra expansion. There's a mixture of things here. Some of these cards are going to be things people will like in solo self-found. Some of them are going to be Trade League exclusive. Some of them are going to be massive jackpot drops that only a couple of people will see in Trade League, whereas others will be a lot more farmable. So let's go through these, starting with Broken Truce. So we're in 3.18, a lot of people were ecstatic to see the Apothecary of their Trade League players. I expect that we'll see a similar reaction to Broken Truce from solo self-found players. Not necessarily everyone, but from a large minority of them. And that's because Cold Iron Point is a moderately common unique, but it's not one that you can count on getting to drop. It's a tier 3 rarity unique, which makes it about 4 times as rare as Tabula Rasa. A lot of people will get it by the time they hit level 95, but they may not have it by the time they hit level 90, and it's an item that's so much better at the start of the league than it is later on. So this is going to be a Divination card that lets you deterministically farm Cold Iron Point at league start. There's a lot of builds that will want to do this. Basically, any physical spell skill gem is probably going to want to do this unless they have some sort of conversion mechanics or they're using Hatred. Broken Truce is a really useful addition to the game for that sort of player. In a Trade League, this is going to be a few chaos early and then is going to crater in price because whilst Cold Iron Point is a very good item, it's also one that can be outclassed by rares eventually, and that people just get their Cold Iron Points because it is only tier 3 rarity. How rare do I expect this card to be? I expect compiling a set of this to be about 4 times as hard as compiling a set of Humility. That's because Humility grants Tabula Rasa, which is tier 4 rarity, and it seems like an individual tier 3 rarity unique is about 4 times as rare as an individual tier 4 one. So for that reason, I'm expecting an individual card to be about 7.25 times as rare as the Divination card Humility. And that means it's going to be very self-farmable, but it's not going to be a quick project like getting a Tabula is. This is something you definitely want to farm in maps. I'm saying that without knowing where it drops, but I'm assuming it's going to be a tile set drop like Humility is. All in all, I think this is going to be a Divination card players will love for the first day or two of a league if they're playing in trade, and if they're playing in solo self-found until they hit about level 80 or so, at which point you've probably compiled a set if that's been your goal. Second card was already known, and that is Doryani's Epiphany. This will either grant you 3 primary grade lenses or 3 secondary regrade lenses. It's going to be RNG as to which one you get, and we also don't know what the relative abundance of the two will be. These are the currencies that allow you to turn superior gems into anomalous, divergent, or phantasmal gems, and I discussed this extensively in the video where this was first announced, so I won't go any further into that. Next is Endless Night. Now this grants Maloney's Mechanism. Where Cold Iron Point is not a very rare unique, Maloney's Mechanism is. Maloney's Mechanism is a unique quiver that has 3 sockets in it. The primary use case for this item is not actually equipping it, it is putting it in your weapon swap. So in your weapon swap, you have Maloney's Mechanism and a 6-socket bow. This then gives you a total of 9 sockets that you can fill with awakened gems while you're running simulacrums. When you run a complete simulacrum start to finish, you get something like 55 million gem XP from that. And this ends up being a huge source of wealth because you can turn those level 1 awakened gems that you buy into level 5 awakened gems. And then depending upon your risk aversion, you can either gamble them on a Locus of Corruption chasing that amazing 6/23, or alternately you can sell them to other people who might just use them at 520 or who might decide to corrupt them themselves. I expect this card to be very rare, and the precedent I want to go by to compare here is the Divination card, the Offspring, which grants Rizlatha's Coil. Rizlatha's Coil is also a tier 1 rarity unique, so this card's so these uniques are about 15 to 20 times as rare as Cold Iron Point, and I expect the Divination cards will follow suit in that. This may well end up as a map boss drop, in which case it will be hard to use juicing in order to get more copies of this card. I consider this pretty much Trade League exclusive. Next we have the Shieldbearer, and this is a Divination card for the Squire. We all knew it was coming. As soon as Mageblood and the Squire were introduced, we knew that there would be Divination cards for both of them. The Mageblood Divination card, the Apothecary, was transformative for farming strategies in 3.18, and I kind of expect that to be the same for the Shieldbearer, assuming that it does drop in a map that people can target farm. GGG consider Headhunter, the Squire, and Mageblood to be equivalent to each other, even though players don't necessarily value them equally, and in the present league, Headhunter and the Squire are about the same value, whereas Mageblood is much higher. They are equal in rarity, And so I expect this Divination card to be about the same rarity as the Doctor, and probably to drop in a couple of tile sets like the Doctor does. This is going to be something that will be a huge jackpot drop if it drops for you. It won't drop for many people, but when it does, it's going to be exciting. And of course, it is something people will farm for potentially, although that is going to come down to how popular the builds that want the Squire end up being. Next we have Choking Guilt. This is going to be one of the rarest Divination cards in the game. This grants Stranglegasp. This is a unique item that is exclusive to Blight Ravaged maps and that is pretty rare in Blight Ravaged maps. This is the amulet that can be anointed 4 times and then can be corrupted. One thing I find really interesting about Choking Guilt is that this is going to grant an item level 80 Stranglegasp. Previously, Stranglegasp has only been available as item level 85. And that's going to mean that when you do corrupt it and wind up turning it into a rare item, which although you don't normally want that on a corrupting, that is actually what you want to see on a Stranglegasp. This is going to be interesting because they're going to have a slightly weaker potential than ones that drop from a Blight Ravaged map would, where they're a higher item level and that corruption can then hit more mods. So this will be really interesting to see how popular this is. I would not be surprised if this ends up as the single rarest Divination card in the game. Although, of course, there is another contender for that down a little bit further in this list, and we'll get to that one as well. So next we have the Enforcer. This grants a set of spiked gloves that are Warlord influenced and that have the specific suffix Culling Strike on them. This is one of the most popular suffixes to get on Warlord influenced items. Ultimately, I expect that this in trade leagues will be a little bit more valuable than 1/4 of a Warlord's Exalt, because a Warlord's Exalt can create the end product of this. You're then going to need to throw a bunch of alterations at it in order to get the Culling Strike mod. This card could be pretty rare. I expect it will be of similar rarity to the Divination cards that give Shaper Influenced and Elder Influenced Opal Rings, or the Elder Influenced Bone Helmets. There's a bunch of Divination cards like that, and they are all pretty rare, and none of them drop as tile set drops. Next we have the Shepherd's Sandals, which is going to be a fun card to turn in mass. This is a set of unique boots that are item level 100 and double corrupted. Now, I do think it's important to say that this should respect the relative rarity of different boots. So things like 7 League Step and Skyforth that are at the rare end of unique boots will not come up very often from this Divination card, whereas at the other end, items like Victario's Flight that are much more common, you'll probably see those quite a bit more. I think that this set will be about as rare as compiling a full set of Arrogance of the Vile. However, because the Shepherd's Sandals is a smaller set size, each card will be rarer than the specific cards for Arrogance of the Vile. Next we have Azure Rage, which definitely is a card with a story behind it. This I believe to be the Divination card that was submitted by Zizaran. He won a Divination card commission for one of the recent races, and he has had a couple of high-profile deaths when streaming to reflect maps. So punishing is the physical reflect mod on maps. Now, if he wanted to be really cruel, he would have made the map corrupted, but he hasn't done that. So that's the story behind Azure Rage, and hopefully you get to reflect on it every time that this card drops for you. I expect it will be one of the more common ones. The Leviathan is next. This grants a double corrupted Maven unique. It's really interesting, the history of the Maven uniques. When they came out, they were not very good, and they ended up getting buffed over time. Viridi's Veil was good on day one. The boots, however, were pretty bad at first, and they got buffed to the point that they're now extraordinarily good, but they were very ordinary at first. And whilst the belts are sort of okay, they're very, very niche, and they weren't used very much. Well, they've been improved a bit, and now I think that every turn-in of the Leviathan is going to offer something. Note that this should not be able to give you the Impossible Escape Jewel, and that's because the Impossible Escape Jewel drops corrupted anyway, and as a result, it can't have 2 implicit corruptions on it. Doppelganger's Guise will be the rarest turn-in from this. There'll be a lot of interesting things that come from this. I do think that this card will be rare, and I think it will come from a very difficult fight. This is the sort of thing that wouldn't surprise me to see added to the loot table for Uber Duber Elder, or something like that. Next we have the Price of Devotion. Now, where the other 3 cards that start the price of are my commissions, this one is not. This is one I had nothing to do with, and this is going to be a card that is going to excite a lot of people, and also it's going to hilariously disappoint 1 in 3 of the people who turn it in. We'll get to that in a sec. This is a card for a Mageblood that is 2 implicit corrupted and that has 20 quality on it. Now, one of the things with Mageblood that's really important is that the number of flasks on it. When you see a Mageblood that is available for trade and that's not corrupted, it basically always has 4 flasks on it. But this is a variable roll. It can be 2, 3, or 4. If you hit 4, fantastic. You're in the money with this. You're really happy with your turn-in on Price of Devotion. If you hit 3, there's less people that will be willing to buy the item, and so it's going to be worth less. But it's not going to be worthless. And the reason for that is that there are a number of builds that want to use Mageblood in conjunction with 2 unique flasks. And as a result, for those ones, having 3 flasks locked in is actually equivalent to having 4. This doesn't make the item as valuable as a 4-flask Mageblood though, because the people who are playing these builds do know all too well that they are competing with less potential buyers, and therefore they can get away with offering to pay less. Ultimately, Mageblood with 3 flasks is still a very good item. Mageblood with 2 flasks, however, is very disappointing in comparison. This is going to be worth considerably less, and in past leagues, it's generally been worth about as much as a Headhunter. That is a Mageblood that's locked in with only 2 flasks on it because it's corrupted, or back in Scourge League because it was Scourged. Turning in a set of Price of Devotion is a huge gamble. This is going to be in line with putting 4 House of Mirrors or 8 Unrequited Loves into the Harvest Double or Nothing Divination card gamble. You are going to end up with some serious regret if you end up hitting a 2-flask Mageblood. 3 flasks, you'll probably do okay. You'll probably be able to sell it for most of your investment, maybe a little bit more, and you might want to use it yourself. 4 flasks, and you could have a very, 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 very big, very, very, very big hit there. Lastly, how spectacular is that art there, with Azure just glorifying in all of the sacrifices that she's surrounded by. Really creepy art, really fantastic art, and I really think that they blew that one out of the park, which is good because this is a divination card a lot of people are going to look at. I don't think many people are going to find it. I think that this is also the other contender for the rarest divination card in the game. This may be rarer than House of Mirrors, and it may be quite a bit so. If it'll either be this or the Stranglegasp card that ends up being the rarest card in the game. So next we have Astral Projection. This is going to grant you a shield which is Shaper influenced. The item level of this is going to be whichever is lower, 80, or your character's level when you turn it in. This is something for solo self-found only. I don't think people are going to want this in Trade League. You're probably going to remove it from your loot filter in Trade, but in SSF, this might grant you early access to a Shaper shield when you really need one. For example, on a Totem build, it's a very big damage boost to get access to a Shaper shield early in your progression. I think that's going to be its main role. Otherwise, I don't think many people are going to be all that excited to turn in sets of this, because ultimately, once you're able to get to the Shaper himself, you will get Shaper shields from him, and you'll get them probably 1 every 2 or 3 runs. You'll get a Shaper shield, and it'll be item level 86 rather than 80. Next, we have Gemcutter's Mercy. I really like the flavor text on this. This is very similar to 3.18's Home. So this grants you an exceptional gem. That could be Empower, it could be Enlighten, and it could be Enhance. These gems are equal in rarity to each other, but there is much more demand for 2 of them than for the 3rd. And that's where I like the flavor text on this. When you can have only 1, which shall it be? Red? Blue? Nah, probably green. This is going to be a pretty rare card, I expect, probably very similar in rarity to 3.18's Home, which is a couple of times rarer than the Nurse. It's going to be pretty painful early in the league to turn this in and get an Enhance, because Enhance is just worth so much less than the other ones. Much more niche. Next we have Checkmate, which is going to grant you a little bit over a quarter of a Simulacrum. So we now have 2 Divination cards for Simulacrums. I really love the art on this. Like Kosis sitting down for a chess match. That is awesome. Next we have Lethean Temptation, which grants you a Nebulis. This is one of the Cortex drops, and as a result, I expect that this Divination card will be pretty rare and will drop from somewhere unfarmable. Nebulis is really interesting in that it is a pretty powerful item, but it's something that is very dependent upon which synthesis mods it rolls, and this does not fix the number of synthesis mods. So this is going to be an extremely, extremely high variance turn-in. Most of the time, you're going to just get a cheap Nebulis and be sad, but then every now and again, someone is going to turn in a Lethean Temptation, get an Exploding Nebulis, and then there'll be a video about it, and suddenly there'll be a huge spike of interest in getting access to this Divination card so that other people can try to repeat your luck, only to find out that they get 15% fire resistance as their synth implicit. That said, it'll be a lot of fun to turn in. And finally, we have something dark, which was covered in an earlier video, which grants you a fully revealed blueprint. This will be a couple of exalts if you hit a gem one, which is going to be 2 in 9. 7 times in 9, you'll hit a lesser blueprint, which will be enchanted armaments or replicas or currency/trinkets, and those will be worth considerably less, but they will still be in the half to 1 exalt range. So this Divination card is not going to be cheap, but it's also not going to be super expensive either. I have no idea where it's going to drop. Anyways, that's all I got on this. May your Varlobs have interesting results, and we'll see you round.